Welcome to the Open Forum. We are going to be looking at an exciting subject. Is entrepreneurship the key to development? And we want to address this question in very openly, with intellectually and emotionally. We want to have first of all, a discussion among ourselves. And I shall be challenging the panelists to some extent, and hopefully they will challenge each other as well. And one of our panelists is on the way and will soon be with us. And then in the second part, of course, you'll be welcome to ask your questions and make your own contributions, and we shall endeavor to respond. This is all supposed to be a genuine discussion. In other words, let's not make speeches. Let's keep it brief and to the point. And when we get to the second part, the same thing applies to your questions. We would ask you to make it short and to the point. So, and then right at the end, as a moderator, I shall ask at least one concluding question myself. And then we shall ask you to fill in the pink form to give your judgment of the proceedings, so that we can hopefully we can help to organize it even better next time around. So I wish us all a very exciting and interesting debate. Now, there are some 6 billion people living in this world. Mr. Wolfensohn, the president of the World Bank, recently noted that about 1 billion of these people have control of about 80% of the world's wealth. And at the other extreme, 1 billion people live on an average of less of $1 per day, less than $1 per day, or 1 Swiss franc. So these are the two ends of the spectrum, the two extremes of the world. Poverty is widespread. About 60% of the world population, where you have high infant mortality, low life expectancy, and also very poor ability to perform in the economic sense. Globalization is proceeding headlong, ladies and gentlemen, but obviously it has not created a situation where a majority of the population is experiencing anything positive from it. The UN figures, which are the best figures we have, indicate that about 4 billion of the 6 billion people on this earth are actually engaged in the informal sector. That's to say, in the shadow economy. That's to say that they're not at all integrated into the larger economy, although they live and work there. In other words, they are marginalized. They're excluded from the mainstream of globalization. So you can see that this directly affects 2 of the 6 WEF priorities. One, how can poverty be combated much more direct? And how can it be much more directly and more effectively addressed than it has been previously? And the other is, what about globalization, which is no longer controllable? How can that uncontrolled globalization be made more equal, more equitable in its effects and its impact? The traditional solutions are all too familiar. Traditional development aid, direct investment, and the World Bank system with macroeconomic approaches, all that is familiar, and we know that in part they are effective, but evidently too little and too slow. The major new hope, ladies and gentlemen, is that in this informal sector, which I mentioned earlier, where economic activity also goes on the micro enterprise level, on the level of family enterprises, albeit not registered, there is a major new dynamic emerging, and it is this dynamic where we see a great number of entrepreneurial initiatives being taken. This is a kind of bottom-up enterprise. So you can see entrepreneurship developing bottom-up, from bottom to top. And this is where we could see a trend emerging very rapidly. Is that a key to development, or is it an illusion? So that's the question we want to ask today. The United Nations has decided that this is a key to development, and for that reason determined 2005 as the year of micro enterprises, and microcredit. So this is the year of this is the United Nations Year of Microcredit and Microenterprise, and so this is a very good choice for our subject today. So the question is this a strategically effective choice? We have to ask who does what and who can do what in the future. So let's get into the discussion. With our panel here, consisting of extremely experienced figures. And let me very briefly introduce you so that we don't spend too much time on this, but I'd like to do it in such a way. Just like to say that we've got two ladies on this panel who have a one-on-one experience in this market. To my left here, but on your right, looking at it from the audience, is Zafar Rojari from Pakistan. She has created a foundation which is called Kash, meaning the miracle in English or German, and that she began to work with micro businesses in Pakistan, and this was, and probably this foundation will be transformed into a bank, and she will explain to you why that is. Originally, she was a musician. And the other lady to my right is Priscilla Daniel. She is the responsible chief of ECLOF International, which is the loan fund of the Ecumenical Church in Geneva. This is a fund which is intensively engaged in 40 countries with institutions involved with micro businesses, and she herself has extensive experience from India, which is where she comes from, as well as internationally. And then sitting next to her, we have Minister from South Africa, Minister for Trade and Industry, Mandisi Mampala. I'm sure I expressed that badly, although I practiced first, and he must correct me if I got it wrong. He's the Minister for Trade and Industry in the strategically the key country of Africa, in South Africa, and responsible for answering this question as to how the entrepreneurial spirit is to be developed in the South African context. And then right at the end, we've got Mr. Arthur Valoyan. He replaces Walter Kielotz, who, for reasons of time, is not able to be here because he's got a major conflict of dates. And fortunately, we were able on short notice to find a competent person from Credit Suisse to join us. He is a member of the board of management of Credit Suisse and is the private banking chief in Switzerland, where he brings to bear his extensive international experience in various countries, including Latin American developing countries. And and he'll tell us how it is what the situation is for banks in this area, what new opportunities there are for banks to get involved in this. And Mr. Walter Fust will, when he gets here, who has spent years developing this very important institution for the Swiss development effort, is world famous for its future orientation, and he will show us how more can be done than in the past. So this is a good basis on which to conduct our debate. Let's begin with the first question then. This part of the informal market, these micro entrepreneurs, these family businesses, what is the situation in Pakistan? What are the figures? Is it 10% of all workplaces? Some people even say 15%. In practical terms, what is it like living in that situation?
First, I'd like to say that I don't like the term informal sector. I think it's better to call it either micro enterprise sector or small enterprise sector. Because when we say informal sector, we are assuming that it's not formalized and there isn't a whole business process being applied there. In terms of Pakistan's population, just to give you an idea of what the role of the micro-enterprise sector there is, the population is about 140 million today, and 65% of the people in the country are employed in the micro-enterprise sector. So that tells you the extent of the sector today. There's another point I want to share about the sector itself. If we look at Pakistan today, the statistics of the GDP growth rate for the year have been 6.5%. However, there are 3.1 million people entering the market today, and a 6.5% rate cannot sustain such a huge number of jobs being created, which means that a majority of the people who enter the market today will find their way into the micro-enterprise sector. So it's also telling you how important this sector is and how important it is to have policies, procedures, and to recognize this sector. Another factor which I'd like to emphasize here about the role of the sector in Pakistan is the employment it provides to women. I think one thing I would like to say here is that women do matter, and women do matter to the market as well. Women's participation in the micro-enterprise sector today is 70%, which tells you that it is a major generator of income for women. And if you look at world statistics that Mr. Brugger had shared earlier on, of the 3 million people who live at $1 a day, 70% of them today are women, which means there is a deep feminization of poverty. If we do focus on the micro-enterprise sector, in some ways we are empowering women, and we are changing society. So it's about transforming society. And I cannot stress that enough.
Schnell zurückzufragen, sind Frauen denn auch die besten?
Well, perhaps women are also the best customers, the best clients of your foundation.
Interesting point that you've raised. Actually, traditionally, microfinance did not start with women clientele. If you look at the case of the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, which started in 1974 and which became the mentor of other microfinance programs in the world, it started with an open door policy. Poverty was the criteria, which meant if you were a poor woman or a poor man, you could get a loan and start a business with the Grameen Bank. But with time, it happened that women took over the process, and there are several reasons for that. Women tend to be more credible. They are the ones that get most affected by poverty. They are the ones that see their children going hungry, and they realize they need to do something about it. And I don't want to offend the men in the audience, but one of the things that research has shown us, and this research was conducted in very disparate areas, from West Africa to South Asia, and it was discovered for every dollar that a man earned, only 30% of that was invested on the family's welfare, while every dollar that a woman earned, 99% of that went into the family's welfare. So what we see is that when you provide women the choice to make decisions, particularly financial decisions, it has a very strong link with the family's welfare. And therefore, with time, women became more credible, and they took over the microfinance movement, and that is exactly what happened in our case. In fact, my institution was set up for women by women.
Sehr interessant. Ich kenne keine solche Statistik für die Schweiz.
interesting. I don't know what the statistics are for Switzerland. It would be interesting to hear them. Priscilla, Danielle, what about the 40 countries where you are active? Do we find this same proportion? Do the informal sector or the non-integrated businesses? How does it look in the countries where you are active?
Actually, I support very much what she has been talking about. And as she rightly said, there's a lot of organization that is going on among the people. It's just not the poor who are just left there. And especially the poor are very rich in social capital. They might not have that much of financial capital, but because of their social capital, they stay together, and now a lot of group formation is taking place. And because of at the lower level, it is small groups, but at higher level, they are forming themselves into village banks, they are forming themselves into self-help groups, and these self-help groups are forming themselves into federations. So thereby what is happening is that they are trying to put their power together, and they are trying to have a voice. And they are trying to become bankable now. People who could not get money earlier from a bank are now able to approach together because they have a large amount of saving with which they could get a bank loan. So, and again, another thing that is happening is also savings. Earlier, people were saying, savings will have to be encouraged because they shouldn't be putting their money in a cup and saving it. They should be given an opportunity. But that stage has gone, and it has come much more beyond that. People are trying to save their money so that that money can help them. They can re-lend to themselves, and they could also access more funds from the society with that kind of a money.
May I just come with my question in English? If you look at your 40 countries where you're active, okay, what is, in your estimates, the average participation of this kind of micro business informal sector? Is it 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50% of the overall economy in labor?
I would say it is approximately 15% from, if we take the poorer section of the people.
That's the poorest part, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, because the international estimations are going for 40 and 50%.
For example, if we say, 3 billion people live below poverty line, and CGAB estimation is that it's about 500 million people who would take microcredit. It's about 1 billion people who would use microfinance facilities, which is inclusive of savings, credit, and other facilities. So it's on an average, it's that kind of a...
Also ein immenser Teil dieser Volkswirtschaft.
So an immense proportion of the world economy is in fact to be found in this area known as micro business, family business, or informal sector, whatever you want to call it. Now, Mr. Minister, do we see the same thing in South Africa? Every second job in South Africa is said to be in this sector, in this area, according to some statistics we have.
Yes, thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. Indeed, in South Africa, maybe the first point I should make is that the critical failure of globalization and economic success, as has been spoken about, is that it does not necessarily address the issue of exclusion and inclusion of people. So even where countries may be successful in terms of achieving high rates of growth, but you still have the problem of exclusion of people. And that's the big challenge which I think is facing the world today, which is how to make sure that globalization, economic growth, economic success translates into the ability of people to become involved in the mainstream economic activities. And this issue is more acute in South Africa because You've got the history of racial division, and therefore this exclusion tends to affect more black people than it affects white people. But more recently, we've actually discovered the extent of poverty among white people. So it is a problem generally of the world, which is more acute in South Africa. Secondly, poor people are not helpless victims. They become helpless for lack of access to important things like basic information, basic facilities, basic services. And they become helpless for lack of opportunity. So our view is that we need to address these issues, access as well as opportunity. And so, indeed, you see with some of the projects that we are engaged in, public works projects to build roads and to build other things. When you get there, if you are driving, sometimes you get stoppages on the way because the road is being constructed. It's amazing the kind of, people that descend on you selling one thing or another. This is in the outlying areas. So people are enterprising. They need opportunity. They need access to basic things. In South Africa, you have a lot of informal business. I don't have a lot of discomfort with informal business, although I understand the viewpoint that was expressed by the first speaker. There's a lot of that kind of business activity. We have a problem in being unable to measure adequately all the activity, the economic activity that takes place in our society. As a result, you get numbers of unemployment that range from 27% to 40%. And you've got a lot of squatter camps or informal settlements. And I was talking to the statistician general, the person who's responsible for our statistical agency. I said to him, you need to go into those informal settlements. Try and understand, how people live there. Because there is some kind of a structure there. Those people, they are organized in some form or other. And you need to interact with them and with the hierarchy that they have there if you are to understand the economic activities that are taking place there. So it is a challenge for us to try and understand that sector so that we can intervene in appropriate ways. Let me just say that in South Africa, one, we support the fact that the UN has declared this year the Year of Microcredit, because it comes at a time when we've realized that our financial institutions, they are not suited, they are not willing as well as not suited to address the problem of access to microcredit. We've just established a microcredit fund in South Africa, which is meant to cater for people who need up to about 10,000 rands, because the banks won't go there. So we are at the stage now of establishing this organization which will extend microcredit to people. I will say other things about it. I just don't want to violate your time constraints.
I thank you, as you're a very rare species of a disciplined minister. Okay? Okay, thank you very much. But anyway, just to come back, so what you are saying basically, I'd just like to provoke a statement from your side. The poor, potentially, are a market. Would you agree with that?
I would say a big yes.
Herr Fust, ist das für die Entwicklung?
Mr. Fust, what about development work, an area in which Switzerland has been engaged for many years? Is that something which you could go along with? Well, quite clearly, says Mr. Fust. I think that there are many areas where poverty reduction is possible, where the most effective approach is precisely a business approach. I think, for example, of schools in Bangladesh. We've done portfolio checks in many countries and checked for the effectiveness. 10 years ago, we were told you're crazy. Poverty alleviation is not a business. But yes, it is, and it can become a factor for growth. But of course, certain health services or basic sanitary services can't be tackled from that point of view or using that approach, but others can. Perhaps one word about formal sector, informal sector. Why don't I like the term informal sector? Because the donor countries have introduced a categorization, the implication being is that these people are somehow not quite legal, they don't pay taxes, and this, as it were, sets up new barriers in our economic thinking, and I don't think that's good. I think it's quite simply bad. An entrepreneur is an entrepreneur, whether he employs 2 people, 20 people, 50 people. He or she is an entrepreneur. We've introduced new barriers, too, with the microfinances, with access to collateral, with guarantees, which are simply not necessary. So I really would urge, let us use the term microsector or small and smallest enterprises. Then we'll all be talking about the same thing. I just wanted to give you the angle in terms of international aid. And I've found a lot more entrepreneurial spirit sometimes in these small and smallest enterprises than sometimes in bigger ones. And if you use the criterion of paying taxes, you'd have to ask, how large is the informal sector, so-called, in Switzerland itself, if you use payment of taxes as the criterion? Thank you very much, says the moderator. Well, most of these micro enterprises are not registered at all. They have no access, as the minister has indicated, no access to public services or utilities. Many of them have no identity documents or passports. They're simply not included or integrated into the formal system. Would you agree with that, Mr. Fust? Yes. But there are plenty of people here running around without identity papers, without documents, and aren't registered. And if they're sole traders, they don't need to register. No, I have found in many countries why the micro enterprises don't want to register is that for practical purposes, they would immediately come under the oppression of the tax authorities, and very many micro enterprises have actually been ruined that way. They've gone bust because of that, because they get mixed up with the sometimes corrupt tax officials. Mr. Valoyan, let's put this to you as a question as a top banker in Switzerland. You've got 4 billion people, 4 out of 6 billion people, and we know that the majority of them are active in these micro businesses or family businesses, whether or not you call it informal, but they lie outside the formal structure, and that means that they are not. They also lie outside the statistics of the World Bank and other banks. They're not captured in the statistics. Is that a subject for a big bank? Maybe this is obvious for the markets, but is it relevant? Is it even registered in banking terms? The answer. Well, I'm from the private banking, on the special private banking sector in Switzerland, and I'm from the other end of the spectrum. For people who've accumulated vast fortunes, either through their own efforts or or whether they've inherited their fortunes, where wealth is handed down over many generations in the same family. But these people too have a strong relationship to this notion of microcredits. We've got plenty of those, plenty of very small enterprises with 10 or fewer employees. So this is a concept which is quite familiar to us. And sometimes those people find it difficult to secure access to financing. Even for these people with very large fortunes, and I know them, quite a lot of them, they feel the urge to give something back to society sometimes. And very often there is this impulse, the more you have, the more you want to give back. And this is actually an actual phenomenon. When you've got more, you do have this feeling that you want to give something back. And it is this, how you give back becomes a technical issue. And the direct way of doing that, of course, is to make donations, or and this is particularly true for people who have worked themselves to accumulate their fortune. They feel a strong empathy with people who, with entrepreneurs, with people who want to start businesses and who are looking for microcredit. They have a great affinity with those people, and then you find there is a readiness on the part of such people, an increasing readiness. And we can see that, and they can see this in terms of, in market terms, in terms of it's being a business opportunity. So let's be very practical, says the moderator. We're saying the poor are a market. There's a market of thousands or hundreds of thousands or 500 million micro entrepreneurs in the developing countries. 500 million. This is according to the United Nations statistics. How are they to be given access? How are they going to get better access to credit? So let's hear from Priscilla Daniel. 40 countries, ecumenical church loan. How does it actually work, if you could put it to us in brief terms?
You want me to be specific about our organization?
Your fund, yeah.
ECLOF is an organization which has been started by the church initially. It was originally started to help churches to rebuild, but then from the 70s, ECLOF is one of the early players in microfinance, and they started lending to the poor. So now about 75% of our loans go to the poor to start micro enterprises. And we actually work with grant money. We get the money from donor agencies and government, and then that goes to the field. And when it goes to the field, it doesn't come back to the head office, but it stays in the country and revolves. Last year, about 80% of our lending capital was from this revolving capital itself. So that way, it goes to help more and more people. And this also helps us to work in areas which is very risky, where there are people who find it difficult to enter. And we are also more than 50%, we are in rural areas. There is also another sister organization, which is Microcredit, which was also started by the church. And this was to capture the investment of the churches. On one side, the churches wanted to, as my other speaker was pointing out, people who have benefited want also to give to the people as donation. But there are also at other times when you want to put your investment somewhere. So the church started this other organization to capture the investment of the people. So now Ecumenical is one of the largest lenders to microfinance organizations.
Können Sie ganz konkret, could it be very precise, how much money is in your system? And what is the average size of credit? Okay. And what is the repayment rate?
And last year it was about 13 million US dollars that was lent, and the recovery rate had been 71%, and the average size has been about 170 US dollars. But in this statistics, what we need to see is that it depends. If you take the average size, in India it would be even 50 US dollars. In Armenia, it would be even $5,000 per a client. So when you put together, the average becomes different. And the same applies to recovery rates also.
How high or low is it? Sorry,
it's even 99% high.
Yeah.
And it can also, some of the necks which have performed very badly have gone down below 30 even.
Okay. Also ist es ein Business? Ist es für Sie ein Business?
Beg your pardon?
Is it a business for you?
Yes. Yes.
You make money?
Yes.
And you reinvest the money?
Yes.
Okay. How is it in your case?
The reason I raise my hand is because I'm interested for Ms. Daniel to, allow us some, or rather help us to get a better appreciation of the cost that is involved. In the process, the work that we've been doing in South Africa to establish a microcredit fund, of course we've looked at models that exist. And most of the models, they exist in Southeast Asia, your Bangladeshis, your Indias, and so on. And one of the things that have been of concern to us has been that the cost of the lending is very, very high. And we had a bit of difficulty in South Africa, to follow models that result in a very high cost of capital to poor people. Now, we understand the reasons why it ends up being very high, the cost. But I'd just like to know from a practitioner, somebody that's got experience of this, because the issue about cost of capital, it then made us to also look at the delivery mechanism. Can we establish a delivery mechanism that helps to reduce the cost? In other words, this Apex fund that we're establishing, do we establish it? Because when we looked at the environment in South Africa, yes, we've got lots of NGOs, but NGOs that are involved in this area of microcredit, there are very few, they've got very limited coverage, and so we had to then look at what delivery mechanism can we establish in order to make an impact and also in a way that can help us to reduce the cost of the lending. So that's the reason I raised my hand, because...
Mr. Minister, what you're saying is it's not yet commercially viable to do it.
No, I'm not exactly making that point. The point that I'm making is that we have been concerned at the fact that the cost of the credit is very high. And we understand the reasons. We understand the reasons because, there's a lot of follow-up work that needs to be done. There's a lot of support work that you need to do and so on. So we are looking for ways of how we can reduce the cost.
Okay. Es gibt auf der Welt,
about 5,000 so-called institutions which are characterized as microfinance institutions. Once again, this is UN statistics. Some of them are gathered together in a fund, as we've heard, and then the 5,000 are in Pakistan. What would you have to say about this? Is it a business? Can it be made cost-effective? Can it actually serve? Can it earn money?
I think these are very important points, and I would like to stress that numbers matter. Throughout this discussion, we've been talking about numbers. One of the things behind microfinance is that it is about providing access to the poor. If we look at market failure, one of the reasons why the poor do not have access to microfinance services is a question of market failure. Why haven't private institutions or why haven't commercial banks entered the market? And the point made by the trade minister from South Africa is that there are barriers to entry. It's an economic choice. The barriers to entry are that delivery costs to the client are very high. So let's look at what happens when there is a market failure. If the poor do not have access to formalized microfinance institutions, where are they getting credit from? This has been going on for centuries. There are two main sources of credit that are available to them. One is known as ROSCA, which means that they have informal credit and savings revolving associations. And it's basically like a kitty. People put in, let's say there are 10 members, each member will put in $10, and they will then revolve that $100 kitty for 10 months. And that's a very common form of microfinance or an informal microfinance available to the poor. The other is the money lender. Let's look at the price that the poor have to pay to the moneylender, and then that will help us understand the interest rate that microfinance industry is charging their clients. The moneylender is actually charging somewhere, I can give you hundreds of examples from Pakistan and India and the rest of the world, is charging anywhere from 180% annually to 360%. This means that when I enter the market with a 20% interest rate, which is what I charge on my loans, it is peanuts. My client, I have 70,000 clients. I've made over 200,000 loans in the past 10 years. None of my clients have walked in the door and said, your interest rate is too high. And the reason why interest rates are high, it's an average cost game. People who run businesses would know this. It can be done commercially. My institution today is commercially viable. We have a positive return on assets. If an investor gives us money today, we would be able to pay them. We would be able to pay them a return on it.
How much?
And
How much?
Well, that I won't tell at the moment. But if you want to know our return on assets, it's 12%, which a very good business would earn anywhere. The other thing is numbers matter. Cost of delivery goes down with time. For example, when I made my first loan, which was 10 years ago, I had 15 clients at that time. Obviously, my cost of operation, my average cost of operation was very high. And somebody could have walked in the door and said, you might as well pay grant money rather than make a micro loan. It was costing me $5 to maintain $1 in the market. It meant that instead of making a $1 loan, I should have given $5 in aid rather than paying that money. Today, to make $1 loan in the market or to maintain the quality of that $1, I only have to pay 15 cents. Best microfinance programs in the world today, the range is between 5 cents to 20 cents. So my program today is in the best performing, efficient programs in the world. And this has a lot to do with vision. It has a lot to do with entrepreneurship, which is the topic of today. And it has a lot to do with trust. If we trust the women or the clients that we work with, we will be commercially viable.
Darf ich nachfragen?
Could I ask an additional question? Originally, you were an NGO, yeah? And you were successful in the way you've described. Now, if I'm correctly informed, you are now going to become a bank, is that right? Why?
We are thinking about becoming a bank. It's a debate because there's a big cultural shift in that. The way we run our business today is very different from what a bank would. But one of the main reasons behind that is resource mobilization. When we talk about scale, when we talk about outreach, we talked about numbers in the beginning. I'll quote you the numbers for Pakistan. Today, there are 6.5 million households in Pakistan that require access to microfinance services. The best microfinance institutions put together are not even servicing 500,000, which means we have to show numbers. And one of the ways you can do that is by having access to resources. Most microfinance institutions that are not licensed usually have to rely on grants or on other forms of funding, and that limits their outreach. Once you become a bank, you're able to not only provide other financial services to your client, which means that your value proposition to the client increases, you also have access to resources which will enable you to increase your program's outreach. And that's one of the main reasons why we are considering a banking option.
Herr Fust.
It looks as though something is emerging which we might call business with the poor. What school would you say you belong to? There are two schools of thought, if you like, in this whole story. On the one hand, you've got people saying it has to be commercial, otherwise it doesn't work and you can't grow it. It doesn't grow any bigger. And the other school of thought says it must be orientated in terms of social development help, development aid. And so where do you see the future in this area? Well, I'm inclined to say you need both approaches, but I would clearly opt myself for having an organization run, being able to be commercially independent, to stand on its own feet, and then they would become formal taxpayers. There are enormous NGOs in Asia with thousands of members who don't pay a penny in tax, and yet they are competing with large companies. And they're on the pretext that any profit they make would immediately be invested in other social activities. In Thailand and other such countries, you find this happening. So seen from the social standpoint, that is obviously to be welcome, but it is. We can't expect that private firms to which they're paying their taxes, you can't expect them to go along with that. So I think there is a problem there. I heard earlier from my colleague sitting beside me, and I'd like to clarify this. Sometimes we act as if microcredit were something absolutely new, but money lending is a centuries-old business. At what, no matter how unjust, no matter how usurious the interest rates, banking with the poor for the poor, if that's really going to be good, that can only be of service to the economy and to the people. But we've also heard from the lady on my right that if such an NGO is given a certain status and assumes a certain power, if it achieves a certain power, it's good then if it can seek refinancing on the local financial market. And here we sometimes have a problem with these so-called donors, the development donors, because they too have an interest in continuing to finance rather than becoming completely independent. So there's a very large number of these microfinancing funds. They are all necessary. But we have to ask whether it wouldn't be cheaper, and this wouldn't necessarily apply to all in developing countries, but the so-called last mile in the existing banking system, to see that possibilities are extended to micro enterprises, so that particularly in rural areas, the investments, the profits are reinvested. The trend in all developing countries is that everything goes to the capital. And of course, it's easier and quicker to earn money there. But then we're not doing anything to foster the investment climate in the rural areas. And I think alongside these new microfinance funds and banks, there is need to act to go the last mile. I mean, this is actually a concept taken from telecommunications, of course. In other words, we need to see these savings reinvested in micro loans, and we've seen that as soon as poor people have any kind of cash at all, the first thing they look for is to link up with others and to get access to small loans. So looking at this term in terms of the last mile, how can we guarantee security and to organize? Is there a role for the state here? Is there not a role for the state? Are there forms of organization to be provided by the state? So yes, it is a business, but not the poor for the poor. It can also be a business of the not poor, providing services or financing services to the poor. We shall see. We shall see in the near future what happens with the transfer of loans. 120 billion are annually transferred from other countries into the countries of origin, sent back by these people. Loan payments, which for the most part, at high transfer costs, are going to the families of the people concerned. And I'm sure that there is need to do something about that too, about the so-called remittances. The moderator. You remind me of the 18th century in Switzerland. We had a similar situation here. And then we got the savings banks, the various kinds of banks which finally culminated in the cantonal banks. No, that was actually in the 20th century, says Mr. Fust. In my own youth, I'm not that far yet. I actually experienced that myself. Only one person within the community knew how much everyone was saving. But that meant that 3/4 of the savings were reinvested within the same community. I have another question, says the moderator, to put to our bankers around the table. If there are 500 million micro entrepreneurs, that's an average with an average of average loan of $500. So that gives you 250 million, a volume of 250 million worldwide. Fust was saying correctly that half of this would find its way back to the developing countries in theory. Could this become a genuine market, or will it remain a kind of appendix? Is it not going to be ever going to become mainstream? Well, this is an extraordinarily deep subject. When you look at the $3 trillion, which is the daily turnover, exchange turnover, this is a vanishingly small figure, of course. But I also have a question about the feminization of this whole subject. I've noticed that women bulk very large in this whole thing. Well, the moderator warns him that he has to make it quick. In discussions about investment, we've heard the term alternative investment. We've heard about hedge funds. Sometimes they're seen positively, sometimes they're seen in very negative terms. But when it comes to alternative investments, we're talking about 20% of people's fortune being invested in alternative investments. Within this alternative environment, such subjects seem to be gaining ground. Microfinance, of course, is one of the subjects, along with other subjects like alternative energies and so on. So the market is already established in thematic terms. But it's a very individual question. But the subject is now on the table. If I look at investments in terms of return, well, you have great barriers to overcome because the cliche idea is that you simply lose money that way. Sometimes you can get a rate of return of 99% or even 100%. In Pakistan, it's sometimes said. So that's something that a banker can only dream of. Even in Switzerland, somebody puts in. Swiss banks, not just Swiss banks, but banks in developed countries need to look in technical terms at the microfinance and to see exactly how it works, how you manage to achieve such high rates of repayment. Thank you very much, says the moderator. Well, we would like to open up the discussion for your questions. And could you, first of all, introduce yourselves? Tell us your name so that we can have some idea what's going on. So we've got a couple of wandering microphones. Fischer is my name. I have a question. Of course, what matters is the efficiency of these loans. That's quite clear. But there's one aspect we haven't touched upon. In Switzerland, there are pension funds which manage hundreds of billions. I myself manage 1.4 billion for a pension fund, and we'd be happy to get 3% in the current environment. But we hear about 20%, 50%, 100% a year. And so my question is, why is the market so inefficient then? And why is it that the Federation, and this is a question to Mr. Fust, although I know he doesn't directly represent it, what about export guarantees? When the risk is relatively small, could we not then better invest our capital into our mutual interest so that the third world could better develop? So this is a question to Mr. Brugger, Mr. Fust. Why can't the whole network be made more efficient? Mr. Fust should tell us his view on that, although I myself as moderator could say a great deal about that, but perhaps I should refrain since I'm the moderator. And then we could also hear from our banker friend at the other end of the table. But unfortunately, we do have to keep this fairly short. Well, we've had various ventures with pension funds for investing in developing countries, and no pension fund has yet lost money doing that. By contrast with what happens with the stock markets, I think that 5% of all pension funds in Switzerland, maybe even if they would invest 10% in such microfinance, they would all be in better shape than they would be if they speculated on the stock markets, at least in the present time. On the second point, where my professional career began was in a commune or a community where there was no access to capital markets, and we argued about whether part of this money couldn't be used to finance municipal infrastructure, to build streets and to maintain ecosystems and so on. And that through an association of municipalities and so on. Well, I probably can't or shouldn't comment on the investment policy. Otherwise, I shall get a telephone call from the finance ministry. But there are undoubtedly possibilities in that regard. Alternative funding opportunities in the development area. I would be more comfortable with that than with the British proposal that the state should borrow from the capital markets and then have this paid back by the next generation in 20 or 30 years. In other words, to bequeath them a debt. We have a different problem in Switzerland. To remove some of the pressure from the investment policy of the pension funds. Now, the export risk guarantees is somewhat alien to me. Maybe we could start an initiative involving 1% of all pension funds investment being sent in that direction. The banker at the end of the table. Well, personally, what we've experienced with the building up of these funds, goes back a long way in Switzerland. This is a subject which doesn't only concern banks. Well, there are guidelines, of course, for the pension funds. They don't want to just lose money on the stock markets. But the most important point, once again, and to be perfectly honest, I was very surprised about this. The general idea, the intuition is that you're inevitably going to lose a lot of money with microfinance. And yet it's a very efficient investment. And it's a good capital maintenance with good interest rates. It'll simply take time until this becomes better known. And when it is better known, then we'll find that this establishes itself very rapidly.
Infrastruktur praktisch zur Verfügung stellen könnte.
To make available in order for everything to be more efficient. Or out of commercial interest. Brief answer, please. That should be made available. It should always be made available. Well, that's open to discussion. Next question. Right in the back there's a question. And then the next one after that will be right here at the front. My name is Maya. I'd like to ask, I'd like to ask a question of Ms. Daniel. When you talk about the church, which church do you mean?
It's ecumenical. So whichever country we are, the predominant churches there form the group, like Anglican, Baptist, Catholic Church, Orthodox Church, so various churches. So in each of our countries, we have a committee which governs the National ECLOF Committee, and that is composed of church members, NGOs and MFIs, then experts from the field, and clients. So when we talk about churches, it's everybody who is there in that particular country.
Danke. Nächste Frage.
Thank you. Next question.
Mein Name ist Christoph Göldi.
Christoph Gödli. I am a Swiss citizen. I have a question to put to the Minister from South Africa. I'm an average earner in Switzerland, and also on the basis of micro business, what can I do for your country? Would it be helpful if I were to spend my holidays in South Africa?
And you should make him a suggestion where, if yes, okay?
Pardon?
And you should tell him where to make vacations if the answer is okay, okay?
Yes, you would make a difference, and it's in very particular ways. The tourism sector in South Africa has grown a lot over the last few years. And if I may say, you know, although it might sound like a very nasty thing to say, you know, the occurrence of 911, it really had that effect on South Africa, because a lot of people who had planned their holidays, they changed and they went to South Africa. So we've seen a lot of, you know, tourism growth, and tourism creates many opportunities, because tourists, when they are there, they require very many things, and they spend on very many things. So they need entertainment, and so local cultural groups are able to provide that kind of entertainment in a way that enables them to earn money. But the hospitality industry, the different services that a tourist requires. And so, and this sort of brings me, you know, to another issue which I wanted to speak about, because you raised the issue of the role of the state. In an environment like that, where you see tourist growth, of course there are a lot of things that happen spontaneously, but we do have a role as a government to provide training to people, so as to make sure that they can improve the kind of service that they are able to offer. And in that way, you make what they do to be sustainable. So even in the context of microcredit, in South Africa, we have decided that we will enter this area of microfinance, because completely, the financial institutions won't go there. And as we go into this, we are, of course, concerned about this issue of cost. I will raise it again, because, you know, the impact that you can make with those kinds of costs, I'm not so sure, you know, how much impact you can be able to make. And again, I mean, we're willing to listen to the experience of people that have been doing this. How much, to what extent can you provide coverage? Because you're dealing with a market failure which is national. And non-governmental organizations tend to be small and servicing particular areas, very focused, you know, until, of course, over time, they can build their own capacity to provide coverage to a much bigger geographic area and to much bigger numbers. Now, what I'm really coming to is that we take the view that in addition to us doing something for people to be able to access microcredit, as a state, we must take a comprehensive approach so that we create an overall environment that enhances or that enables people to get out of this trap that makes them unable to access financial services and finance and other, you know, facilities like access to information It's a big, 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 big constraint on people. Just for people to know where to go to get what, for people to know what opportunities exist. So in addition to making sure that people can get access to microcredit, as a state, we've got a responsibility to do other things. We've got to make sure that we put up the infrastructure, we continuously improve the infrastructure, that we bring services closer to the people. And one of the things that we are doing in South Africa is to, because we've got this racial problem, we are promoting what we call black economic empowerment. And this is a process where, we want to achieve the inclusion of black people into the mainstream of economy through, ensuring that people get skills, that people get opportunities for them to participate in the running of enterprises and so on. But one of the things that we're doing is to make sure that government departments and government public entities, as well as the private sector, can, because these, government or parastatals, they buy a lot of goods and services every year. So in government, it is expected that a certain percentage of the goods and services that you buy, you must buy them from small people. So our prisons who feed prisoners, they buy vegetables that are grown by people locally. So the point that one is trying to make is that, and I'm sure that many, agencies such as the ECLOF, probably, I don't know, probably they function without that kind of deliberate government programs that are aimed at creating an environment. I don't know. But in South Africa, we've recognized that you can't just, say you'll provide microcredit. You need to do other things so that overall you are creating an environment that enables people to get out of that poverty trap. Because you also don't want, one of the programs that has grown a lot in South Africa, over the last 10 years is our spending on social grants. But we are very conscious also that we're not building a nation of dependent people. So you want to get people out of the dependency.
May I check on one point? Just 1 minute. You said it's market failure, but it's probably also policy failure. May I just make a question? I know a recent analysis about Egypt. If you like to formalize your company, small micro company in Egypt, and you do it the right way, as legally formalized, you need to go to 54 institutions of the public bureaucracy, and you need full-time work 1.5 years if you don't bribe people. Okay? Now this is bad policy environment, isn't it? Is it that what you talk about?
I agree. In South Africa, there is the historic policy failure. The fact that you had apartheid, and this discrimination, so historically you've had that kind of failure that has created this situation. But one of the things that we're looking at today is a regulatory impact study on small and medium and micro enterprises. These things that, in order to do anything, you need to knock on so many doors, or maybe the laws that we pass. I'll give you a very clear example. We've passed certain laws that are meant to promote skills development. So companies pay certain levies, to a skills development fund. We've had to look at the question of excluding small enterprises. Otherwise, we don't create, give them the chance to succeed. So, yes, that's a very valid point.
Thank you. Next question there. Nächste Frage dort.
Kesselring.
I think the developments you've been talking about are very interesting and very promising. But if I think a bit further, I do see the danger that you create new businesses and then the whole thing gets mixed up with the international stock market. Joseph Stiglitz has drawn attention to this. Money gets invested by the West in the East, and then a lot of it is fetched back, and this leads to further breakdowns. So hence my question to the various panelists: is it desirable that Western funding should be involved? And how can the microcredit banking system be secured against a stock market collapse or some analogy of that? The moderator, let's start by asking Mr. Valoyan and Mr. Fust after that. Well, I'll keep this as brief as possible. At the present stage, this certainly isn't yet a subject. That's the first thing. And secondly, in Indonesia, for example, something of this sort has happened. The usual problems arise, and it would be too bold to say that nothing of that sort couldn't happen. Yeah, I think that the security provisions, the capital adequacy requirements, for example, would have to be imposed. Because if nothing is done to regulate the situation, shareholders would literally undermine or would literally remove all the profits. But they have to be protected against the shareholder loss. It would probably be simpler to solve this problem than to mobilize more resources. I would hope that there would be a solution to be found.
The kind of investor that we need is a social investor, somebody who is willing to wait. Patience is important because results don't happen in a day. If you're talking about poverty, for example, if you talk about the impact of microfinance, the point that the trade minister has raised, I would like to delineate that maybe $100 doesn't mean anything to us, but $100 with a continuous access over 10 years can have a significant impact on poverty. For example, we've seen in research that if you provide a 3-year access to a poor household, within 3 years, the poor household is able to move beyond poverty. So there's a huge social investment framework to microfinance. And if we are wanting investors to come into this, if we are talking about the issue that you've talked about, the flight of capital from the east to the west, a lot of that can be resolved if we get the right kind of investor, if we get the right kind of mindset.
But social investor still is an investor. He likes to have a return.
I'm not saying that the return should not be there.
Okay, we agree on that.
But certainly, I think that certainly we do need to try and promote a flow of resources in a way that can enable this kind of access. And so even some of the public sector institutions, because you do have parastatals, that invest in financial institutions, I think we need to encourage them because even the issue of growth of small and medium enterprises, beyond the micro sector, one of the problems, even in England today, is the flow of resources so that you can do a lending to those people.
Die nächste Frage, bitte.
Next question. I have an idea and a question. I don't think it's all that easy to work with microcredit from what I've heard. There are issues of regulation, there are practices, there's a whole lot of considerations, and also how it's to be accomplished in cultural terms. Now, we have somebody here with a great deal of experience who has seen an awful lot and knows what the difficulties and what the problems are, how you have to tackle them. So the question is, What would happen if you went to Credit Suisse and show them how to do it? You maybe spend a month there or 3 months.
Ich wollte Sie auch noch.
I'd also like to send you. I'd also like you could. I would also send you to go off to the pension funds as well.
Yeah, please, Priscilla.
See, one more thing that we are trying to do now is guarantee fund. That is, the money is kept here, and with that money, the banks guarantee our National ECLOF committee in that local country. So that way what happens is that the money is safe here and the risk is limited. And so the National ECLOF committee is able to borrow on the basis of this money that is retained in Switzerland, and they are able to pay back in local currency. So that is one of the ways in which we try to protect this money, because as you said, when it goes there, we are working with risky situations.
Herzlichen Dank. Wir haben noch Zeit.
Thank you very much. Well, we've got time for another 2 or 3 brief questions.
Yes, my name is Linda Walker, and I know that Professor Brooker himself has had some personal experience with microfinance. Would you like to share a little bit of your experience that you've had in microcredit and what you've learned?
Das ist das zweite Mal.
Well, that's the second time I've been tempted to do that. Perhaps I could spend 1 minute doing that. In my own personal experience, the more commercial this subject is approached, the more sustainable the impact is going to be, the more commercial you approach it. It's another question what you do with the profit afterwards. But if you don't approach this in commercial terms, you're going to send the wrong signals to the entrepreneurs. You're going to send out the wrong signals if you don't impose the necessary interest repayments or make the terms too easy or whatever. And then there's this question of the social investors. Even if they are investing for the long term and they have the best intentions of the world, there must still be some return. They must be able to look for some return on their investment. The institutions that have managed that are the most successful. Of the 500 microfinance institutions, which I mentioned earlier, maybe 10%, the 50 are highly professionally managed, are very profitable, and logically they plow back most of their profit into the business to make it bigger. That is the model. And also with the refinancing institutions, there are a few, even in Switzerland, that are very commercial and very successful. They're not going for maximal return, but rather a sensible long-term return on their invested capital, and that's certainly better than certainly a better return than buying a federal bond.
Portfolio approach, which is used by investors. High risk investments that they make, which tend to be high return, and some of your low risk, low return, and so on. So you can balance the portfolio of your investments, and you can include in there alternative investments, social investments, so that you know that a portion of your overall investments goes into social investments. Because I think that one of the best ways, Vailoyan, that people that are successful can pay back to the community, it's to facilitate, for people to gain access in a manner that enables them to be successful. Not only by giving grants and making donations, but also paying back by ensuring that you create opportunity for other people to succeed.
Danke. Noch eine Frage?
Thank you. One more question? No hands? Well, I don't see anybody else asking questions. So now we approach the concluding stage. Oh, yes, there is somebody. Just hang on a second until you get the microphone.
From Italy, I would like to know if the two ladies have a website that I can research the organization.
Everybody here has a website, and
we like to know it.
And the two ladies have a especially attractive one, certainly.
Okay.
So come up afterwards and you get the website,
Very
okay?
good.
Whoever is interested may join us for a minute here. Is that okay? Dankeschön.
Okay, so now we come to the concluding stage of this panel, and I would just like to express my thanks for the very professional, competent, and very experienced panelists, and I'd like to put them a final question. And each will have 30 seconds in which to reply, only 30 seconds. I'd like to give you 2 or 3 impressions that I've gathered from this discussion, and I'll let you reflect on that and then ask you for a specific response. When we talk about this microfinance, and we think about this in terms of the future, as having a powerful future, and if you had one wish in this area, and in a year's time, 1 year on, we're going to be fulfilled, what would be your most important wish? While you reflect on this, let me suggest 3 ideas, not a summary of the discussion. I couldn't meaningfully do that in 2 minutes, but rather as an incitement to you to draw your own conclusions. First of all, personally, I think that what we've been discussing here means that we are dealing with a reality which actually affects a majority of the human beings living in the world, and undoubtedly a great majority of people living in developing countries. And clearly, this has been dramatically underestimated, the importance of this in the past. There has been insufficient appreciation of the implications of this system and the potential of microfinance to stimulate development from the bottom up. And so I think this can also impel us to feel optimistic, despite all the tragedies that keep occurring. This is something that can be done. Poor people know how the market works, and this is where initiatives can be taken. If this does not succeed, we're going to see even more conflict in the world than we've seen before. If we don't succeed to bring the majority, to integrate this majority into the globalization process and to share the advantages of globalization with them, then we are going to see even more severe conflicts. And secondly, in terms of making this market more dynamic, more transparent, more efficient, there is great experience. This is not a mature market. We are right at the beginning. We're at the beginning of a very powerful market development. And we need to identify the 10% of the 500 microfinance institutions who point the way ahead. And then we can bank on them, and we can say that's the direction it should go in order to reduce the transaction costs, the high transaction costs, which we've heard about from the minister and others, in order to make this business more productive and more efficient. That's the second point. Thirdly, all of this has to do with cooperation. It means that a great deal has to happen in the developing countries themselves. And therefore, I attach great weight to what the minister from South Africa. Yes, there must be a dramatic improvement in the overall conditions within which entrepreneurial activity is promoted and not impeded. The informal sector is made formal so that micro businesses can grow, and also how local saving can be made possible and can be promoted. These are big subjects. It's not just a subject for us. It's a subject for them over there, too. And there is room for a great improvement in our collaboration there. So now I'd like to know where should we start? Mr. Minister, I think you've deserved to be asked first. What is your dearest wish?
My wish, very briefly, because this phenomenon tends to affect mostly people in the rural areas, what I would like to see, is a significant increase in the ability of people to grow their own food. Secondly, that people can go beyond the stage of growing food just for their own consumption, and through whatever forms, cooperatives and whatever forms, people can get to the stage where they can grow food to go to market. And I'm really just focusing here on people who are in the rural areas. And finally, one would like to see enhanced access in general and better opportunities for people.
Danke, Herr Weig.
Thank you. Mr. Valayan. Well, I have two areas, but only one wish, says the moderator.
Wunsch, Herr Valayan.
Only one wish. Well, I've got one view and a few prejudices. And if I may, I'd like to see the 3 billion men in this world perhaps become more creditworthy.
Das war noch meine Frage von vorhin.
That was my question earlier.
What's your wish?
Well, it's my wish that in my lifetime we see poverty only in museums, and that I'm able to shake hands with the last poor woman on earth.
Dankeschön. Frau Priscilla.
Thank you. Priscilla Daniel.
The Year of Microfinance. So all the practitioners, the policymakers, and microfinance providers, investors, and advocacy, people who are doing advocacy, all of us are involved in this year. And if this year could end with the fact that microfinance should not be just treated as a debt business. That's what had been happening with the private, the local money lenders. So instead of thinking of it as a debt business, we must think of it as a very effective tool for poverty alleviation. And in that case, the future of microfinance will really be very powerful.
Und Walter Fust.
3 wishes in 10 seconds. The first, stay on the ball. I think it's wonderful that you devoted a Friday evening to this subject. No, Saturday it is, isn't it? You see, I'm behind the times. Secondly, this is not only the year of microcredit, it's also the year for sport, peace, and development. And thirdly, help us to find innovative solutions for the financing of microcredit. I'm convinced that Switzerland has something to offer here. Well, that was a wonderful conclusion, says the moderator, and I would always like myself to thank you very warmly for your interest and for the questions that you've asked, and thanks very much for coming along and joining in. I'd also invite you to give us a warm round of applause to our panelists.